The Xtalks Life Science Podcast is your source for all things pharma, biotech, medtech, healthcare, research, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com. And this week, I am so happy to introduce our special guest on the show for this week. With us, we have David Moss, who is the CEO of INmune Bio, a company developing a new class of dominant negative inhibitors that target innate immune pathways, driving chronic inflammation in serious diseases. The company's key programs include an off-the-shelf umbilical cord-derived cell therapy being developed for recessive dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa, or RDEB, which is one of the rarest and most debilitating genetic diseases. The company is also developing a next-generation innate immune modulator for neurodegenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's. David has been in biotech for over 30 years, beginning his career in San Diego, that then took him across to different cities across the U.S. He served as CFO of INmune Bio since the formation of the company in September 2015. David has founded, funded, and taken public various companies in a variety of industries since 1995. David was a founding investor in Reliance Service Group and was also managing director of corporate finance for a New York-based securities firm, among his many roles across his career. David holds an MBA from Rice University and a BA in economics from the University of California, San Diego. So to learn more about the exciting work that David is helping lead at INmune Bio, including its innovative cell therapy approach, let's turn to him now. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you for having me, Ayesha. I really appreciate it.
David, I just want to begin by asking you a bit more first about INmune Bio in terms of the company's missions and goals in immunotherapy and the cell therapy spaces in particular, as it's an ever-evolving field with exciting advancements. And so I'd like to know more about how INmune Bio is positioned within these realms.
Yeah, very good question to start. And I think the name INmune Bio really kind of highlights our focus. The I in the end is really because we focus on the innate immune system. As you know, there's two sides to the immune system. There's the adaptive and the innate, and they both play a very important role in combating disease. And while we've been very successful in drug development and biotech, a lot of it has been on the adaptive side of the immune system. You know, just think anything with a T cell, a checkpoint inhibitor, a CAR T, many drugs really are very good at modulating the adaptive immune system for a response, but we kind of left the innate immune system alone. And the innate immune system, I always find is an interesting statistic, is that, you know, the vast majority of the animals on this planet do not have an adaptive immune system. They only have an innate immune system, but they deal with many of the same things we deal with, right? Infections, viruses, cancer, et cetera. And they do it with just their innate immune system. So we really wanted to dive into dysfunction of the innate immune system and look at how we can modulate, repair, restore innate immune function, with the idea that if you do that, then you can have the adaptive immune system come together. So we kind of have looked at it like, you know, you have a boxer and you want both hands in the boxing match. You got the adaptive on their left, on your right hand, and you've got the innate on your left. And we want both those in the match, because if you only have the innate or you only have the adaptive, it's like a boxer having one hand tied behind his back. And we wanted to bring both to the fight. So INmune Bio stands for innate immune system. And our goal is really to make repairs and modulate. We think that'll make a difference in many diseases.
I love that analogy, and it's definitely makes so much sense where you want to have all your arms and all of your tools in the box out and ready to fight against all of the things that can go wrong, essentially, in pathologies and diseases. And so, yeah, that's very, very cool. And I love the name INmune Bio, alluding to innate, the innate immune system. So that's really cool. And can you tell us a bit more about the indications that INmune Bio is currently focused on? I did mention in my intro that you're working in rare diseases, rare genetic diseases, through to neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's. So I'm very interested to know and learn more about sort of how you've decided to focus on these specific indications, and perhaps even what their commonalities are in terms of leveraging the innate immune system in these diseases.
Yeah. So let's talk. So we have two platforms within the company, and each platform really is kind of a pipeline within a bottle. They have many applications. Our overall focus really is around inflammation, chronic inflammation. More than 50% of deaths can be attributable to a chronic inflammatory disease. And so both platforms share a common trait around addressing inflammation. That's number one. The most advanced platform is called CORDStrom, and CORDStrom is the one that's in the rare disease in RDEB, as you had mentioned earlier, Ayesha. And CORDStrom is really the most advanced mesenchymal stromal cell program that's been developed to date. If you look at stromal cells, they've been around for a long time. There's been a lot of R&D and research done in it, but the problem has been with stromal cells is that there's no homogeneity in the product. In other words, where they source the cells are different, how they grow the cells are different. And so what happens is batch to batch to batch, whether you make a product today, you make one tomorrow, or 10 years from now, they're all different. And we all know that regulators do not approve drugs that do not have consistency. And what we've done with CORDStrom is what we've developed consistency through identification of what we use are Wharton's jelly from umbilical cords. And we identify certain markers that make them very consistent in the same product. And then we pool them and we grow them so that what we know we make today or what we make tomorrow, what we make 10 years from now is identical. And that's what regulators like to see. They like to see homogeneity in these products. And what we know about CORDStrom as a program is that it delivers growth factors. They can modulate cytokines and inflammation. And this is a big restorative component that can cut across lots of different diseases. We also know that we can use it as a vehicle to deliver certain things, like we can vector in genes or we can vector in other products, which we've done successfully. And so it becomes really a delivery platform and a platform itself that through its own well-known and established biology can make a difference in inflammation and things like wound healing, scarring, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll talk about that clinical trial a little bit later. And then the second platform is called XPro. And if we look at the history of inflammatory therapies, drugs, every single drug that you have been familiar with that deals with inflammation, whether it's that's potent, whether it's a steroid, an anti-TNF drug, a JAK inhibitor, an anti-IL-1 or cytokine, they're all immunosuppressive. And the problem with being immunosuppressive to deal with inflammation is that you get long-term consequences of immunosuppression, which really can drive infection, cancer, and other diseases. So what we did with XPro is we have a drug that's developed to potently treat inflammation, but do it without immunosuppression. And it's the first drug I've seen that can do that. And when you have a drug that can treat inflammatory conditions like neuroinflammation without immunosuppression, what happens is, what we believe happens and what we've seen in our treatment is that not only do you get rid of this inflammation over time, but you get the immune system of the patient to start functioning properly. Think of inflammation as like a cell death driver. One of the apex cytokines is called tumor necrosis factor. What does the word necrosis mean? It means death. And so we know inflammation causes accelerated cell death. We also know that our immune system is really vital for keeping us functionally and healthy and taking care of really all the building blocks in our body. And so if you can slow down the cell death and you can keep the immune system happy, we think that makes a difference in many diseases. And that's what we're trying to do with XPro.
Very fascinating. And I haven't heard about stromal cells in such a long time. I actually studied the tumor microenvironment and stromal cells for my PhD when I was in graduate school. Yeah, in AML. And so
that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's like, wow, I've been doing this podcast and been here at Xtalks for a long time, for a couple of years, several years now. And in all the science and biotech companies, I haven't heard about stromal cells since my graduate work. So that's really great to know that you're working sort of, in this space and really taking a look at that microenvironment and the cytokines and all the growth factors that emanate and are produced by the supporting cells in these microenvironments. So that's very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. And in terms of unmet needs, in chronic inflammation underlies so many different diseases. And so what would you say is sort of the biggest challenge, unmet need clinically, of course, but because we're talking about a wide array of diseases, each disease having its own unmet needs. But if we talk about neurodegenerative diseases, for example, so what really has been the challenge in addressing chronic inflammation so far? And where do you think
that's a great, that is a topic that we can go on for a lot of things, but there's a couple things that really come to mind. I think the first thing is kind of what I hinted upon, is that the tradition of how we treat chronic inflammation has always been with immunosuppression, because those are the only tools that we've had to date. And that's really set the way we think about treating inflammation. And the problem with that is that when you first think of immunosuppression, is that it makes a huge difference in the patient. Like, chronic immunosuppression is just downright bad and dangerous. And so we have to get that mindset. I think the second thing is that, we don't really look at chronic inflammation as a disease, like cholesterol, for example. It's, you can't feel it, you can't see it, you don't know you have it. We know it. The biggest driver of chronic inflammation is age, and you can't intervene with age, unfortunately, at least not yet. And so as we're getting older and older and older, especially past, let's say, our third decade of life, this chronic inflammation is just kind of creeping and bubbling up. I like to say, think of an elderly person, right? What do they have? They have like this thinning of the skin, they have muscle atrophy, they're not as strong anymore. They have cognitive aging. They're not nearly as sharp as they used to be. Their eyesight's kind of a little bit weaker, right? They can't see as well as they could. That's really all chronic inflammation over a long period of time. It's just kind of slowly, like a little ember burning over time. And so, really what we want to be able to do is slow that process down, hopefully maybe at some point change it. And if you can do that without immunosuppression and long-term treat this chronic inflammatory process, you probably can slow down, let's say, muscle atrophy and all these components you see of an elderly person. So we really start, when you do drug development, you have to pick a disease. And we decided to pick one of the hardest, but one of the most interesting, which is neuroinflammation, which is really, inflammation in the CNS or in the brain. And when you have a CNS disease, whether it's, traumatic brain injury, whether it's depression, autism, Parkinson's, ALS, dementia, etc., they all have an inflammatory component. And traditionally, we haven't been able to treat that well because we give drugs in trials that are immunosuppressive. And the thing that's really interesting is we know that about half the cells in our brain are immunologically active and important. We know that through the GWAS studies. And what happens is that if you get rid of inflammation through immunosuppression, half these immune cells in the brain become sick from the immunosuppression, and they don't do their jobs of taking care of the healthy cells of the brain, like the neurons and the synapses. If we're able to get rid of this neuroinflammation, this accelerated cell death, and not be immunosuppressive, what occurs, we believe, is that these immune cells start to be reparative. They start to take care of the synapses and the myelin and the debris and the and the neurons, et cetera, and you get a bit of a healthier state. And that's really what our hypothesis is around clinical trials in neuroinflammation with XPro. So, we finished a randomized, short, small phase 2 experimental study that somewhat proves this hypothesis. And where we are today, is we're waiting on regulatory feedback. We intend to have an interaction with the FDA for our end of phase 2 meeting to decide if they agree with us that we see signals that show that this is what's occurring, and can we work towards a registration study. We're going to know that sometime in the next month or two, and we think that'll be a huge step for the industry if that's the case, because if you think about what we're doing, we're really doing something that no one's done before. It's very new, it's very novel, and the hard thing about doing something new and novel is you have to change the old mindset, which is the traditional way we've looked at in treating inflammation.
Indeed, I think new frontiers demand new mindsets for sure. And in terms of the immunotherapy, cell therapy space, what are some of the current challenges? And then the flip side to the challenges are opportunities. So how have you actually seen the field evolve? It's come a long way, of course. But what are still some of the challenges currently, and what opportunities do you see within the space moving today and moving forward?
Yeah. So, in the cell therapy space, I think we've had a history of build it and they will come, where we get this really cool science and then we say, hey, let's go get the clinical results. And if the clinical results come in good, then it becomes a problem of how do we go make it? And it can be incredibly expensive, right? To go backwards and figure out how you're going to make it. I think what we've tried to do from the very beginning is develop the program as a drug from the start, and know that we can commercially manufacture it at reasonable costs in large scale before we even step into the clinical trial arena. And that's what we've really done with the mesenchymal stromal cells, is that we've been able to, we started from day zero. It was developed as a drug, and it was developed as a program that could be commercialized before we even went into the clinic. So I think that's one thing. I think when people hear cell therapy today, they get a little bit scared because of the costs of manufacturing these things. With regards to what we've done successfully, I hope that others consider it, because the manufacturing setup for is ungodly expensive. And what we've done is we've leveraged sites like Catapult in the UK, which are government-sponsored facilities, which help reduce costs because you have shared costs across multiple companies. So, I think if we're smart about addressing the manufacturing costs as we go into the science from the get-go, I think it'll make a big difference in cell therapy.
Absolutely. And I'd like to actually pivot more towards your journey in this space. As I mentioned in the intro, you have over 30 years of experience in the biotech industry. And I'm really curious to know how you've seen the industry evolve in all of this time. And how do you currently see it, and where is it heading? And also particularly, we talked a bit about this, or you mentioned this right before we headed into the podcast, about the biotech industry specifically in San Diego. And so I'd love to learn more about all of that and your specific journey.
Appreciate that. Yeah. So I was very fortunate enough. We had a family friend who was one of the early guys in San Diego. In fact, he was with the very first biotech company in San Diego. It was called Hybridtech. And I was a kid in high school, and I saw him working to develop programs and drugs, and I became very fascinated. And I was fortunate enough to go to UC San Diego, where he taught an extension class and was able to take his classes. And it was the success of a company like Hybridtech that was sold to Eli Lilly that allowed the biotech arena in San Diego to spawn, because many of the executives that made obviously a lot of money went off to start other companies, and off it went. The Bay Area was very similar. It was Genentech, right? That was very successful, is very successful. And many companies spawned out of Genentech. And I tell you, so it used to be that San Francisco and San Diego are kind of number one and number two, San Diego being number two. And then Boston kind of came up with Genzyme and Biogen shortly thereafter. And San Diego became a distant number three after that. But it was that same ecosystem of companies. So I was able to kind of run up through the ranks of seeing his success, and that allowed me to really learn off of his experience and then start doing it on my own. I ended up at a venture group that was in the Bay Area and Seattle that was focused mainly on biotech, starting biotech companies. I did that for a number of years, and then went off, and I've been doing it on my own since, I can't believe it, since 2001, really. So I started INmune Bio almost a little over 10 years ago. And again, the belief on developing drugs for the innate immune system. It's taken this long to get through 2 phase 2 trials. And, we're now at a point where we're getting ready to file for commercialization in our Cordstorm program in the UK and the US. But the drug development timeline is just extremely long. What have I seen over this period of time? When we started in biotech, things were a lot less expensive than they are today to run a clinical trial. And I think part of that was because back then, there was only large companies that ran clinical trials. There weren't these small entrepreneurial little companies trying to do these things. And what's spawned over the lifetime since, let's say, the 80s to where we are today is that we've seen so many advances in drugs that would never probably happen if it wasn't for this small biotech universe. And I like to say that it's these small companies that really are the innovation engine for large pharma. And what occurs is that, you get a bunch of smart scientists in a room, they want to solve a particular disease that they have a passion about, and they come up with all these novel ideas. And if they have enough money to go try it, sometimes it ends up in a really cool solution that solves a disease. The other thing I've seen is that, one of the things the reason biotech really started in America is because we had a free pricing system. It allowed us to charge what we wanted for a product, which was the incentive to go start and do this long journey and risky journey of developing drugs. It's really interesting when you look elsewhere in the world that have more price controls. They will have biotech companies there, but it'll be fewer in number. And many of those companies are doing their drug development in the United States, or at least their primary market to start. So I think, what I fear is that that too much price control will really kill innovation in the drug development. And at the end of the day, no matter what asset you own or invest in, I do believe the most important thing we could do to society is develop therapies that make a difference in patients and families and their lives. And so I hope that we continue to foster this innovative ecosystem, because the word immunotherapy that you mentioned at the very beginning was not a term before the 1980s or before the 1970s, let's say, to be safe. It was something that was really coined out of being able to take the immune system and turn it around and use it to our advantage to develop drugs that make a difference. So I hope that we can continue. I know we'll continue on this innovation path. I just hope that we can flourish in this innovation path and continue with novel drug development to make a difference in patients' lives.
Absolutely. And it's so fascinating to me that you have such a robust background in finance, and you're just speaking about science you've been in the industry for over 3 decades, but pure science combined with the financial background, I think that's really, really cool. And can you speak to us about that in terms of how your finance background has informed drug development? Because as you mentioned, it is a business at the end of the day, a business to get therapies to patients. And so how have those, has your training and your experiences in finance as a CFO at various investment companies, of course, in biotech, really informed your strategy in terms of developing drug development and leading biotech companies?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Look, I love science. Science is really, it's cool, right? There's a lot you can do. I always like to say you get a bunch of smart people in a room and you give them money, you can solve a disease, but then it becomes the question of, is that economic? And so I like to work backwards, right? I like to start and say, hey, look, this is the disease we're going to solve. This is realistically what a market will support. And then you work all the way backwards and say, if we develop this type of a drug and we do this clinical trial, can we make it at a cost that's going to fit within this product that makes it a sustainable business? And it's really simple versus, let's say the science comes first and you're like, this is really cool science, it'll make a difference. And then you go out and you do it. And then you say, oh, well, I can't manufacture for less than a really high number. And it's just unaffordable. And there is a reality between a patient's, I hate to say it, between a patient's age and what a cost is going to be, right? There's a reality there. So having an economics background and finance background really helps you look at it, I guess, pragmatically. And then the science, they meld together, right? They meld together. You put the two together and you can figure out if you can build a business around it. Our chief science officer, his name is Professor Mark Liddell, is really a process engineer at heart. And so he wants to figure out how you can make these complicated products in vast quantities too, because there is a difference between, let's say, being able to make a drug where you could maybe deliver 1,000 patients a year versus making a drug you could deliver 100,000 or 1 million doses per year. So all these are factors that have to come in together and decide if you have a business or not. I think one of the reasons why rare diseases have been popular amongst small companies is because it's low volume, high price products. And so it allows them as a beachhead to get started and then go do larger ideas. Really what we're doing is kind of both, low volume, high price for a beachhead to support a large market and development in something like Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, and it's so true that I feel like really it's an interdisciplinary approach that's really effective at the end of the day. I feel just like when you hear about people with diverse backgrounds, whether engineering, finance, coming together, and there's so many different perspectives that can be brought to the table and needed in drug development, because it's not just about the science all the time, of course. And it kind of reminds me of like academia, where I feel like there's a bottleneck there for sure, where there may be great science happening, but how do you translate that into something that can get to patients? And so I think a lot of ideas and a lot of things get stuck in labs in academia, I find. And so definitely, having those, as you said, pragmatic approaches, I think it's very important. And that's what industry really speaks to. And I guess the question also comes up with these multi-million-dollar therapies, the question of access. And I know that, of course, in the US, there are different reimbursement programs, government pathways. And so how does that fit in? Again, if a patient is listening to a new therapy coming out with a $2 million price tag, how does that translate in the real world setting?
Yeah, so like in the case of our RDEB program, we designed a cell therapy, which is expensive to make, that really kind of interrupts this scratch, itch, pain, wound cycle in RDEB patients. And we recruited a lot of, probably a majority of the children that had this disease in the UK. It was a monumental trial that took a long period of time. And the results were such that even though it was a blinded trial, the patients could tell whether they were on drug or on placebo, and it had a marketed difference in their quality of life, pain, itch, and wounds. And when we saw this data, not only did we hear from the PIs and the patients at how it made a big difference in their lives, but it became very motivating for us to say, hey, how can we get this product to them as quickly as possible? So what we decided to do, and this is really what's driving everything, is that we're working with the MHRA, which is the UK's FDA, to try and accelerate the approval of the product. And in the meantime, what we're going to do is we're opening up an open label program to enroll all the children that were on the drug and provide it to them at our cost. Provide it to them for free. We'll invest in that cost because it's very motivating for us to see the change that this made in these children and their families, right? It was a big deal. And so I think what we try to do is that once we get through that and we're able to get regulatory support to expand the program to Europe and the United States and other parts of the world, we're going to try and price it as reasonably as we can to make sure that we can not only fit within the payer system, but also make it manageable to these families and keep the program sustainable at the end of the day. And the other thing I think that the payers should note is that the money that comes back to support these programs supports the expansion of that program to these children as quickly as possible. It also supports the advancement of the science. So, for example, we have other programs that we'll reinvest in that will be more advanced, hopefully try and deliver the collagen 7A gene genetically to these children, for example. So this is really about kind of fostering the ecosystem and expanding the solution to provide a meaningful difference to these families.
Absolutely. And yeah, of course, we did touch on this in terms of the financial challenges in therapeutic development today, especially in a space like cell therapy. And so what are sort of the challenges or potential bottlenecks? And do you see the prices of these therapies potentially coming down? For example, like, I don't know, I think TVs or flat screen TVs were super expensive when they first came out, I think.
Yeah.
And so is that going to be something that we're going to see with cell therapies as well, for prices to come down? What will it take? And just overall, what are the financial challenges in developing these therapies? Is it purely from a manufacturing side, or is it the R&D, or everything combined?
Yeah, it's everything. So if you look at just the basic law of economics, is what brings down prices is competition. And so really what you want to do is you want to encourage other competitors into the field over time. So when someone goes through a 10, 20-year process to develop a drug, they should have a right to enjoy some exclusive period of time based on the work that they've done. And then after that, it should be a competitive playing field, which should reduce costs. So over time, the real costs of the drug should be coming down. And if you look at CAR Ts, for example, it's a really good case because these were very expensive the therapies that were made when they first came out. And then companies like BMS and Novartis and others invested a ton of money in reducing their manufacturing costs. And now they've come down. They still got a ways to go, but they've come down quite a bit. And we have a lot more competitors in this space developing CAR T programs, and the costs will start to come down over time, especially as patents expire. Look at GLP-1 inhibitors. It's another great case, right? Where they've been around for a long time, obviously, for diabetes, but they started off expensive, and I think we're going to start to see them come down quite inexpensively, especially as they've gotten to pill form and so on. Same thing applies to all these other drugs, other than maybe some very high-tech, expensive genetic medicines. If you allow competition over time or improvements over time, the costs will come down. But it takes, the one thing about the drug development space is you have to allow for time for that to occur. It's not like, you've got a lot of computer manufacturers that manufacture different computers. And so the costs are very competitive when you go out to buy a laptop. Here, someone develops a novel drug, give them 10, 15 years exclusivity to recover their investment and time back that they've invested, which people often forget about. and then let the competition take place. So I mean, just go back in time and look at all the medicines you can buy at the drugstore now that are over the counter, like Zantac, for example, that costs practically nothing. But when it first came out, it was expensive, right? So just give it time. We tend to not have enough patience, and you need patience in drug development.
Absolutely. Wonderful insights and perspectives there for sure. Thank you so much for that. And in terms of collaborations, again, you've had such an illustrious career in biotech. And as you said, biotech is kind of the innovation engine driving sort of the drug development space. And so, however, partnerships with large pharma eventually, or buyouts, or partnerships with academia, patient advocacy groups, what does that whole ecosystem look like? How has it changed over the decades? And what kinds of partnerships is INmune Bio interested in pursuing or is currently pursuing?
Yeah, no, great. So I think if you look over the decades of innovation and M&A and partnerships, we've seen a lot of development in that. I think that large pharma. I was just at the JP Morgan conference, and every large pharma had a talk about their business development activities. I think we're going to see it accelerate over the next 5 years or so, partially because there's many big products that are coming off patent, and a lot of these large pharma companies have a tremendous amount of purchasing power and capital. We'll see, I think you'll also see that get more competitive and maybe even move a little bit earlier once again, even to some phase 1 type assets from a competitive standpoint. We really build our companies to be independent, and as we go along and get to more closer to approval or near approval, I think that's when we look for partnerships. I think with our CORDStrom program, let us get our marketing authorization application in, and let's see what the regulators say about that. I think it's a very likelihood that if we're able to get that program approved, we'll find a partner to help us with sales and distribution. I think with XPro in Alzheimer's disease, let's wait to see what the regulators say. If the regulators are on board with us to move forward on a registration program in Alzheimer's disease, we might have to get that program underway and started a bit. But I think there's a good likelihood that if we can show that we can make a difference in Alzheimer's patients, there'll be a lot of interest in that space. But we're going to have to carry the baton a little bit further.
And in terms of upcoming milestones, what can we expect to hear from or see from INmune Bio this year as we're still in Q1?
Sure.
And in the next couple of years, what are the things that you're most excited about? And you did mention a couple of regulatory decisions and programs that you're looking at for decisions and awaiting.
Yeah, let's talk about our most advanced program. So CORDStrom, we're going to file a marketing authorization application right around the middle of this summer. So middle of this year. And we expect to hear from the MHRA sometime, I'd say the first half of 27, which could potentially be an approval. We'll also do the same in Europe. And then we'll file a BLA here in the United States towards the end of this year. And we should also, the program already has orphan drug designation and rare pediatric disease designation by the FDA. So we should hear also in 27 about that program as well. We hope that we'll be able to clear some of the regulatory milestones to get the product to patients who are in serious need. I want to emphasize that in RDEB, it's typically been looked at as kind of a topical disease, and CORDStrom is really the only product that addresses the systemic nature of the disease. So that is a really critical factor in its application. With XPro, it's very, very clear. We've said publicly that in Q1 we will have our meeting with the FDA, our end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA. And we hope that the FDA understands that what we did was new and novel. It was it was the first to do a neuroinflammation enriched Alzheimer's trial. And when you're the first, there's new findings. And what we found is that we had signals and effect sizes and cognitive scales, neuropsychiatric scales, gray matter biomarkers, and p-tau and GFAP biomarkers that show that benefit the drug. What it does is it defines the patient population for a registration program, which in many cases is the purpose of a phase 2 program when you're doing something new. And we hope that the regulators agree with us and they help us design a registration study that allow us to recruit the right patient population to run a robust registration trial for Alzheimer's disease. We should have those minutes in hand this quarter, and we'll report that to our investors.
Fantastic. David, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing all of the wonderful, amazing work that you're leading at INmune Bio. Really, really fantastic stuff. Amazing science through to, again, thank you so much for all those insights from the financial perspective, commercializing a drug, what's, at stake and all of those factors that go into it. And then ultimately, it all comes down to the patient, of course, as you said. And I think that really comes
100%.
Through in the work that you're helping lead at INmune Bio. So I'd like to thank you so much, first of all, for all of the work that you're doing in this space and for your time once again here with us on the Xtalks Life Science Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, and I thank you for helping educate the world in terms of what's going on in the biotech community, because it's very important.
Absolutely. All right, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
Visit xtalks.com to join the life science community and unlock exclusive access to editorial content, webinars, networking opportunities, and more. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policies or positions of Honeycomb Worldwide. For more information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.